We're live. Second, actually the third stream of the day. I'm just going to post this in the link in the chat. Follow us at Selena Greenfield over on YouTube. Subscribe if you like what we do here. Help us support witchcrafttv.online as well. So I saw this article on the Wild Hunt, and as a death midwife per se, this article kind of stood out for a couple of reasons. One, the political atmosphere that we have in the States, but also it's a social construct as well. So we're going to talk about the sheer power of death, what it truly means. So with that being said, let's jump in. This is by Cleo Adjana. Go support her over on the Wild Hunt. Death helps us to find balance between too much and not enough. When we think about death, we think only the negative. That's not what death means. As a death midwife, we understand the transformative power, not just for those who are crossing over, right? Which is why we have the term Hell the Traveler. But it's also transformative for those who are left behind, the relatives, the families, the passing down of the lineage. Death is a power that is unavoidable, but it's a power that can change the perception of the reality in which we find ourselves in when we stop still long enough to muse on it instead of fearing death. I think one of the ways that we can approach it is like this article, is transformative. Cleo writes, "We enter life with a one-way ticket to the end of the line." It's true. If we are lucky, we ride with reckless abandon, experiencing the thrills of exploring the unknown in what we see, taste, feel, hear, and smell. Whether we like it or not, our condition in human form is all about the journey, fueled by oxygen, nourished by water, sustained by food. We cannot live for long without oxygen. Like a fuel tank in our motorized vehicles with hypoxia, we're in an E, we need to find a way to refuel with oxygen desperately. When we go so far past the E, we feel the last gasps of the car. We've reached the state of anoxia. No oxygen, no point of return. We're done. All right, so let's carry on. In Joseph Campbell's PBS special with Bill Murray, Joseph Campbell and the Power of Myth, The Hero's Adventure. Campbell remarks, and I quote, "We go from the tomb to the womb of Mother Earth to be reborn." Now, she makes a really good point here. Society has, the thing with the world in which we live in, everything is based on cycles. We've been here before, and we're going to be here again. We have lived countless times. We choose sometimes to forgo those memories and to start life anew. There are people who are old souls, which make up a great deal of people, actually, but old souls remember the lessons of the past. They've been here before. They understand it. They'll be here again. Death is about repetition. It's about this idea that there is a continuum, and that continuum carries on and on. For example, deja vu is a really good example of this, right? Deja vu is when we remember or foresee certain events that will come to pass. You can't outrun deja vu. It's just not going to happen. We have people who are connected to death, such as death midwives, right? We understand the true power of it. But I think it's more important to reflect on the current state of society, that we are coming up to this event horizon. We're coming up to repeating history over and over again. We always make the same mistakes. Nations rise, nations fall. This is the ebb and flow of reality. This is the burden of humanity, really, is every single nation or civilization that rises, there comes this point, this event horizon, where an event occurs and that civilization collapses. The civilization can no longer function. This isn't just a Trump thing. This is a global phenomenon. It's one of the rare mysteries of the human condition. We always need a hero. We always need a villain. I've been called a villain. I'm very happy with that. But we always seek to have these two different poles, one fighting for the ultimate good and the other fighting for the ultimate bad. As we reflect upon the society in which we live in, this is represented by how people are being acting, right? People who act with a certain power of good may act with a certain power of wrong. And people who act in the power of wrong can sometimes act in the power of good. It's all about change. Sometimes we, as humans, we fight change. We desperately try to cling on to things that we once had. We desperately want to hold on to the sort of the comfort. There is something really weird with humanity is it's a bit like a child. As a child grows up, it outgrows toys. It outgrows the comfort, the nest, right? But sometimes children need that comfort blanket. They need that kind of remembrance of safety. And this is kind of how society behaves. As much as we have modernized and as much as we have grown as a global community, there are certain things that we don't want to let go of. And those things can be very controversial. For example, racism, right? Sexism, misogyny, all of these wonderful terms. These are things that society has never let go of. There seems to be this grasp that it's kind of in the same way that we need a villain. It's the same way we need these social constructs. We always need to, as a global society, need certain things, even though we know those things are wrong. And this is the power of death. Death teaches us, speaking as necromancer here, death isn't about the actual passing of a human soul. It's about the destruction of an old way of life and a beginning. Everything's reborn. And because everything's reborn, people will fight that change. If you look at grieving families, for example, right? Grieving families are desperately hanging on to those memories that are left behind. They resist change. They resist the ability to kind of say, okay, things are different now. How are we going to act? How are we going to be as a society? And I think a lot of times people resist death as much as they resist change, right? It's just a global thing. It's a phenomenon. It's a very strange phenomenon. If you are watching this, go check me out over at Selena Greenfield on YouTube. Would greatly appreciate that. Let's carry on. For many, the current state of the economic affairs globally has a tinge of hypoxia. We are at a point of no return, but we are hanging on a cliff with all appendages and extensions grasping for firm, solid ground and solace. Death, in its literal sense, is both finite and a continuous mystery. She makes a really good point here. A really good point. We're at this point in society where we've gone past that point of no return. We have a society that seeks to destroy itself. It's you've heard the term we are our own worst enemy, but when we reflect on society, we are our own worst enemy. As much as we strive for peace, we need a villain. We desperately reach out for the next villain, right? We desperately want there to be the anti to the positive. It's just a human thing. But I think what's happened in a global society now is we've reached that point. We've advanced ourselves. We have AI. We have streaming networks, right? But at the same time, society itself is hell bent on its own destruction. People harming each other, people throwing around racial slurs, the current state of the economy, right? We've reached that point where we have to think to ourselves, what's next, right? What's coming up, right? Currently in America, the global stock market is crashing, right? We are witnessing the birth of another recession. We seem to, as humans, we seem to be more focused on self-destruction than we do on growing, on learning, right? We see people bitterly torn between political parties. We see people who still attack each other based on how they look, based on what they represent, right? I'm very open with the fact that I'm a transgender woman. Okay, deal with it. If you don't like me because I'm trans, that's on you. It's not on me. I'm not going to change my ways, right? But society seems kind of, it's kind of weird, right? So people are looking at LGBTQ, they're looking at minority people, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's their fault. Or, oh my gosh, a transgender man or woman in sports, or whatever the situation is. And what's happening is people are reacting to it. They divide themselves on these lines, right? And they start attacking each other, bringing themselves down without actually realizing there's only one human race. Who cares what you look like? Who cares what you represent? Who cares what it is that you do? There's one human race. And that human race is at that point of no return. We are looking into that abyss. You know, for those that remember the age-old quote, if you stare into the abyss for too long, the abyss will stare back at you. And there's a reason for that. The abyss is the great unknown. For some irrational reason, we have placed ourselves on that event horizon. We, as a race, are desperate to see what is in the abyss. What is coming up? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad, right? Each day we make choices as human beings as to what we can, should, or would let go. Sometimes these choices, the tiny absences that we do not acknowledge as death, but which affect us nonetheless, are easy ones. When hard times hit financially, individuals and families will look at work to cut back. The question of what we do need for pure survival versus what we do want come into play. Perhaps we'll seek recipes or tips from friends, family, and elders on how to stretch a food item to make it last longer, how to freeze what is cooked to use over a week or two, or how to use less expensive food materials that are new to us. We are now faced in a situation as a society where I remember the First World War and I remember the Second World War. And we have this idea of rationing. We've got back to that. But we've done it to ourselves. We've allowed things to get to a point where the resources available aren't exactly available. We've reached that point in our civilization where it is a quest for survival. But at the same time, society in general is staring into the abyss. It's almost addicted to the darkness rather than seeing the positive side, right? A great deal of society focuses far too much on the negative, and the media does a great job with this, right? We use the term, if it bleeds, it leads. People tune into the media not because they want to see positivity, but because they are intoxicated with constant blood and gore and the ever-present forces of death, war, famine, right? All of these things. And what society does is we're driven by fear. We're driven by blood. We're driven by the need to always have a villain, but never a hero. There isn't a call, a global call for the next hero to stand up, but there sure as hell is a call, a needed mandate to have somebody to hate, to have somebody to turn our anger towards, whether it be the current administration or whether it be down at the micro level, right? Society. In society, we look around and we see the force of death everywhere. People, again, they make the mistake. They think death is like, they think that death is just that moment where the body dies. That's not death. But if you look at society, if you look at how people are behaving, death is everywhere. Death has taken on the manifestation of anger, pain, suffering, agony. It's taken on a perception of if blood is spilt, society deems it worthy to talk about. If wars are waged, society deems it credible to talk about, to focus on. If the stock markets crash, if the administration does something, right, society deems we have to stand and rise and we have to do things that we normally wouldn't actually do. This society is surrounded by the force of the changing attributes of death, where one way of life is done. And what's happened is we are entering into this new territory. All of society, every single living human being is angry. Every single living human being has been affected by the touch of death without actually realizing that they have come very close to the void. I always talk about the veil between the living and the dead is no more. There is no veil. We are living in an age of enlightened spirits, yeah, but on the counter to that, death has touched every single living being. You all destroy, maybe on a minor level, but that destructive nature, the extensive amounts of violence within our society, right? Society seems to want to kill itself. No matter how many times good news is published, no matter how many times positive tarot readings are done, no matter how many times there are good movies, people aren't interested. They need blood. They want blood. They want suffering. They want pain and agony. But at the same time, the same society is kind of like they want it. When they get it, suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, what are you doing? This is really bad, right? But if you were to tell society, yeah, but this is what you're focused on, this is what's going to happen. If we always focus on the destructive nature of death, you'll sure as hell get that. It's called making manifest, right? Making, if you tell yourself that something bad is going to happen to you, something bad is going to happen to you. But what society's done is it's focused all of its eggs in the one basket of fear, hatred, destruction, right? Anywho, let's carry on. A whole generation gets to see what was done during the Great Depression from grandparents and great grandparents whose wisdom is now passed down on TikTok and YouTube. Look, I've been a YouTuber before. I'm back on YouTube now. Life is more than YouTube, right? But people do just turn to social media to learn how to live. You can't do that. You can't pass life's lessons down just by YouTube. I mean, sure, a video like this might help, right? But it's not the one answer. I don't have the one answer. I don't have any answers. I'm just here to go over an article and give my 2 cents on it. Am I right? Who knows? Am I wrong? Who knows? Who cares, right? This is what media is like. But we have a generation now that kind of doesn't know how to talk. And what I mean by this is when I was a young woman, I remember sitting around the table and we would actually talk about our day. We would have a round table discussion. Hey, how was your day? Right? Good or bad? Still wanted to know. Kids used to talk to their parents. Kids used to talk and play and explore the world around them. But now we have a generation that is tied to their devices. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to communicate. And then, hi Amy, how's it going? I'm back on YouTube. Follow me at Selena Greenfield if you wish to. Amy says, I'm going to read your comment here because we are streaming live. Amy says, I actually have cookbooks from such a great grandmother that are from the Depression era. Yeah, the Depression, we're seeing it again. We're seeing the Depression come back. It's already begun. That there is no going back. You know, I used to, well, I've stopped doing Forex currently, but I will say, right, when you watch markets plummet, you know what's coming. You know that we are entering into a time, and it isn't just a Trump thing, it's a global thing, where the best, like, this will be the Great Depression on steroids, on drugs. There's no other way to describe it. This depression will be our last depression. I mean, I'm predicting that now as a death midwife. This depression that we are entering, based on how society is doing, based on how people want to harm each other, based on the sheer amount of fear, the sheer amount of anger, the need for blood, This depression will be our last, because this depression is going to shape a future generation that is only going to know one thing: hatred. The next generation, if things continue as they are, the generation that is growing up now isn't going to know how to love, isn't going to know how to share, isn't going to know life's lessons, isn't going to know the pitfalls. The generation that is coming up now, we are running that risk of that generation being a generation of overarching hate, overarching racism, and overarching fear. A generation like that cannot survive. It legitimately can't. And if this depression hits, which it will hit, we are right now in a depression. But this depression will be our last, because there's no way a society can sustain itself when there are two different poles, where there's a pole that is oblivious to the damage that is done compared to a pole that is fully aware of the damage that's been done. Humans tend to, one of the weaknesses of humanity is that it's very easy to pull the wool over people's eyes. As a magician, we know the power of misdirection, making you see something that is not really there, making you think something that is not really there. And it's almost as if politicians have mastered misdirection. But what happens is, if you are misdirected, you're no longer focused. You're no longer thinking broadly. When I did stage magic, right? The power of misdirection is a big thing. Being able to move around people and to manipulate the scene, and people will buy what the trick is selling without actually realizing that a trick has been done. But now we're in the Great Depression. Now we are in the second coming, per se, right? Only this time, because a great deal of society is being misdirected. Their attention is not focused. They're not thinking. They're driven by this mandate of everything will be all right. No, right. Markets can't just bounce back. This is the thing, right? Society can't just bounce back. Once you cross that threshold into fear, agony, pain, torment, you're pretty much done. There is no coming back. This is why when Joseph Campbell was creating his version of villains, right? The villain is created. A villain doesn't just kind of turn up out of the blue. There is this catalyst. There is this storm that makes up the villain. Well, even if Bob has switched to public speaking about it, it will definitely take we are the people not standing behind our TED jockeys and just take it. We will have to, yeah. I was reflecting on this morning. Actually, I've been up for a couple of hours, but I was suddenly thinking about the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, where people just said, we have had enough. And even people that were very pro the Russian monarchy, very pro the French monarchy, they even saw the issues. They knew that something was wrong. I believe that if people stop hating each other, if they stop allowing this misdirection of pain and suffering, they can actually see what's really going on. A total complete breakdown of global civilization, a like of which I don't think has ever been seen before. A society that destroyed itself based on a whole shit show, pardon my French, of events that occur. Everybody divides themselves based on politics. If we move away from that, we have to unite ourselves by society. We need to stop thinking black, green, red, orange, blue. We need to stop thinking that, oh my gosh, it doesn't affect me because it's happening miles away. Everything affects. That's why society is screwed up. Everything affects, right? Let's carry on. Neighborhood gardens, once called Victory Gardens during the World Wars, and Recession Gardens around 2008, flourished in 2025 because we as humans, we need to act as a means of survival. As humans, we are built for the ride. And when functioning appropriately, bearing illness or either mental or physical, we try to avoid, until the last possible second, the finality of death. Unfortunately, What's happened in this world? One question I always get asked is as a death midwife, as a necromancer, right? Do I believe in a horseman? Yes. But not as the Bible has them. I believe that the horseman represents society as a whole, global society. Death, right? Death appears. Why? Because everything has to end. Everything. Nothing is permanent, right? Famine, pestilence, suffering. All of these things we see around the world. Sometimes we choose to turn a blind eye. Other times we don't. But the end result is you've welcomed that horseman in. You've welcomed that force to make self manifest. I was talking with a couple of other necromancers over the weekend, and we were talking about this. As much as necromancy now is tending to the grave, we also look at society as the grave. We're looking at society as when you're very close to death, it's a very unique thing. You remember past events. Your mental status is replaying images. You're being prepared for something to come. When working with the dying, you can see in her eyes a lot of regret. You feel that regret as an emotion. As much as society is cruel and heartless to some degree, I think that the only thing stopping us and tipping that balance in favor of death, in favor of complete reset, is regret. I think even the most vile humans have regret. Even the most pious has regret. Even the most stoic has regret. But I also believe another fundamental force, and this is going to make me sound like a hippie, but okay. One of the fundamental elements of life is love. But society no longer knows how to love. Society, or based on the current status, looks at love as the act, looks at kissing and hugging and companionship. That's not love. Society has lost the ability to love everything that they have in the moments in which they have left. In exchange, we turn to the media and the talking heads, and we have been misdirected into if it bleeds, it leads, to the point where love as an element cannot really function. You say you love somebody, okay. How well do you know them? Would you stand by them through thick and thin? Would you stand by them as they were dying? Would you minister to their graves? Would you carry the torch forwards? We see this question popping up time and time again. Has love actually died? I don't think it's died. But I think love has taken a back seat because society needs the villain. I have been called a villain many times. Maybe I am. In some people's story, I'm different. But even the role of the villain has regret. Even a villain can love, can care, can take into account pain and suffering around the world. Let's carry on. In the Rider-Waite Coleman Smith tarot deck system, that was a mouthful, death is the 13th card. It's true. The image is varied. The emphasis of the card is on change and transition. This is something that we as necromancers fundamentally believe in. Change. You are going from one state to another, right? And you don't need to die to experience this, right? One of the ways in which I explain death to people is it happens every single day. You're born. Okay, cool, brilliant. You come from the womb, right? But as you age, from baby into toddler, toddler into young child into preteen, preteen into teen, into adult, each of these phases is marked by death. A part of you has died for a part of you to continue on. You've all experienced death without ever realizing it. When you guys sleep at night, you're in the realm of death. You are on that event horizon. where the dead are fully aware of who you are, where you are, and what it is that is musing in your minds. The dead aren't stupid. The dead know you better than you can think to themselves. They're becoming. Absolutely, 100%, Amy. Okay, let's carry on. So this represents the span of the fool's journey. Yeah, I won't go heavily into this, but this is what I want to focus on. The challenge of death is a challenge to acknowledge and understand ourselves on a deeper level. Here we go. This is a wake-up call. It shouldn't take a transgender woman on a Monday morning where it's bloody cold outside to tell you we have to do better. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, people of all ages, of all genders, of all races, look at where we are. Take a few moments and think to yourself, look at where we are. Look around us. Do we see flowing butterflies and everything positive? No. Ladies and gentlemen, you have welcomed death into your lives. You've welcomed death into your minds. You've welcomed death into your spirits. The transformative nature, eagerly waiting for you to realize that we can change. I believe that a great deal of society is asleep, streaming, completely oblivious to destruction, completely oblivious to pain, suffering, torment. And these dreamers, they have no idea of what the world is truly like. We use the allegory of the cave, for example, right? These dreamers are a bit like those people trapped in the cave, hypnotized by the flames, unwilling to lead the darkness into light. And the same is true for light. Society itself is dreaming, it's sleeping, and in those dreams are nightmares, unable to wake up, unable to force themselves to rise, to take a deep breath in, and to avoid the event horizon that you all stand on. You all wanted the big bad villain, and you welcomed it with open arms. You welcomed death. One of the greatest forces, one of the greatest mysteries, the Great Reset. Always wanting a villain, never wanting a hero. But what is counter to death? Death can be never countered. It's about change. Sure, it would be great for one person in society to start a tidal wave, to wake up an entire population of the earth, to listen to what the mother of the night is telling you. Change. Change. You want to end the levels of violence? Change. You want to end the levels of bigotry, racism, hatred? Change. How do we change? We no longer fall into the traps that our ancestors had. That's a big one. Our ancestors did some pretty messed up things, right? So how do we counter that? By breaking that cycle. You can beat death. You can never truly defeat it, but it can be beaten. It can be stalled. I was doing ministry the other day, and the person I was working with knew it was coming. Didn't want to stall it, didn't want to do anything. But suddenly had that aha moment and realized that we have lost what it is that is worth fighting for. We live in a society, ladies and gentlemen, touched by death. And you did it to yourselves. I think one of the, if this does sober people up, so be it. You welcome death. You welcome the villain. You welcomed the anti, right? You welcomed all of this negativity. Why? Because society had grown weary and had grown impatient with peace, had grown disillusioned with the false narrative of love, true love, right? So society turned its attention on its own self-destruction. Death is transformative. My favorite quote, the end. It's never the end. It's never the end. If we continue down this path, There are two possible outcomes: full-scale war, or someone, somewhere in this world, calling a halt, doing their best to make their voices heard in the dead of the night, calling together night and day. These days, I'm a lady of the night, not that kind of lady. Mine's out of the gutters, boys. But I am the dark lady for a reason. I'm pretty much only active at night. At night, when I walk around, whether it be midnight, whether it be later, I see the world differently. I understand why society is sleeping, why they've chosen comfort in a dream, rather than to wake up and to realize we need to do better. We need to change. We need one voice, the voice of humanity, to regain control of Speedy Chariot. And we need to do this before we finally delve into the abyss. Months ago, I was taken ill. I will tell you, I saw the abyss. I saw what's there. I have a newfound love for my role as a necromancer, because I know the ultimate truth. I know who and what is coming, and who and what is here. It's a sobering reminder, ladies and gentlemen, that you cannot outrun death. You cannot outthink death. But I believe with change, we can soften that blow. Rome rose and rose and rose, grew bigger and bigger and bigger, had war after war, conquest after conquest, and then suddenly collapsed. Persia grew and grew, developed as much as they could, and then collapsed. The first iteration of Islam grew exponentially, mastered the trade routes, brought with us Sufi mysticism and the Saracen deck, but grew to a point where it can no longer be contained and gone. The nations of the world, all competing for resources, or itching for one more fight. This is what caused the First World War. You had stuff, I had stuff, we want to test stuff to see if it can work. Each nation wanting to fight each other. Why? Because of past actions. And now, after 2 world wars, and after a Cold War, we find ourselves back in this cycle. Everybody wants to fight to prove some kind of point, without realizing the event horizon you now find yourselves on. Sobering thought for the day, but one worth sharing: the force of death. For Witchcraft TV, I am Lady Selena. I'll be back with more very soon. If you like this video, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss any other vids. I'll be back with more later today. And until next time, may you all blessed be.